The new Tesla Model Y has been announced to the world and is available for pre-order for all countries that are being fed by the Giga Shanghai out of China, which of course includes China and, luckily enough, Australia. But I wanted to know, what are the apparent differences, the objective differences, the displayed differences, at least on the website, between the new Model Y and the old Model Y. So for that, I thought there is no better way than going straight to the source, straight to Tesla, because until we can get one directly in our hot little hands and someone can do subjective testing or at least objective audio testing and real world results, we aren't going to know. But we can still take a look at the listed differences and see how well they end up comparing. I mean, of course, objectively, there are differences in lighting bars. As like they say, there has been apparently a redesign from end to end with, if nothing else, the lighting bar in the rear and in the front compared to the traditional singular lights in the front and the back. But what else does it entail for us? Now, of course, there is also a plethora of other countries that I could have chosen from, but at least the Germans do use the right units, being kilometers, and also they use the WLTP cycle compared to, let's say, the USA side, which then I would have to translate between the two units, imperial and metric, and it just makes for more of a headache, especially if you can come all the way down here and start to see the new Model Y specs compared to, as we can see, the older Model Y specs, the traditional, the original. Now, as we can see up the top here, the German Model Y has gone through quite a few iterations, or at least quite a few variants can be still bought, but I just wanted to start with the rear wheel drive, as of course that is what was originally launched, and this is the launch series rear wheel drive, which, judging by the range difference between the standard and the all-wheel drive, you can see that there is quite an increase of almost 100 kilometers, so it must have just the smaller battery of the lot compared to the maximum range rear wheel drive model, as we can see, gets some of the highest kilometers of, well, it does get the highest kilometers of all Model Ys. However, this is where the story starts to unfold, as we can see that with the older Model Y, the 20-inch rims offered a traditional 430 kilometers, whereas with the new wheels with 20-inch rims offers 466. So of course, there is, even from the get-go, an increase in efficiency from this new vehicle. Now, of course, this comes from Tesla's ability over the last few years since the original Model Y came out to be increasing efficiency both in aerodynamics of the vehicle, from materials used, and even down to the motor efficiency for the same output of energy. Where we can see some significant improvements, or at least change, is that the acceleration is listed at 5.9 seconds, which doesn't line up with the acceleration of the standard range, but more so with the maximum range battery, being at the bigger battery, which is able to deliver more power to that rear independent motor, bringing it down to the traditional 5.9 seconds. But then with the new Model Y, that acceleration performance has been able to be squeezed out of just the standard range battery. Now, of course, the driveline is not going to be the only increase in performance, or at least changes to this modern vehicle, and so if we go back to the rear wheel drive variation from the traditional Model Y, we can see that the weight has slightly increased, but not by much, only 12 kilos. However, the cargo has apparently decreased by 20 liters. 20 liters doesn't sound like much, but if you do get 10-liter buckets, two 10-liter buckets, and put them next to one another, that could be the size of a small carry-on bag, and so it will be interesting to see if the packaging in the boot, especially with the seats folded down, has changed within that. Maybe even though the cargo is apparently technically smaller, this width might be different, the height might be different, you might be able to fit in practically the same amount of stuff, but the fact that it is decreased, I would like to know where that has gone. Now, of course, in the new Model Y, the center main screen has been brought up to mirror the new Model 3, being it slightly larger by 0.4 of an inch compared to the traditional one. Ground clearance has gotten lower though for some reason. We can see that there has been no change to the axles in the track and the rear, both 16-36 millimeters across the board. However, it has got surprisingly 14 millimeters longer, and I do believe that that is because of the license plate area, being the rear diffuser has been increased slightly. People have been speculating that it might be to try to buffer a rear end collision, so there's less major components that may be at least impacted in a rear end collision, which is statistically the most likely area for an impact for any vehicle. And it might also just provide, once again, a little bit of extra efficiency gains, as of course these vehicles are chasing every last bit they can get. Where we do see another slight change though is in the supercharging max speed for the new versus the old, and of course this is also going to be dependent on battery types. However, considering that this is not the North American car, you are going to be having less differences, but of course that could be a major thing, as it is listed listed at 170 kilowatts for the standard range battery on the old car compared to 175. And so as much as it's not much, every little bit will do. Of course, if we go up to the maximum range all-wheel drive and the long-range all-wheel drive, you do see that there has been no increase in max speed, which has been disappointing to quite a few people. They, especially with the new version 4 dispensers from Tesla being able to offer such high kilowatt throughput, people were hoping that the new Model Y might be able to just go a bit higher than 250, but currently it is not the case. Moving away from the direct specs though, we can see that there is also a few differences in what is going to be offered in the final model. Now, I've already been over the fact that Australia sadly only gets the 20-inch Helix wheels. China, for instance, does get 2 sets of options, and so we are hoping to see that change long term. But if nothing else, we can see that there is also new/different colors. Now, of course, the overall styling with the front and rear light bar is probably going to be more of a tell for most people than the color, but at least there is a slight difference in color in what can be actually got. So we have a new glacier blue compared to the traditional deep blue metallic. Also, we have gotten rid of, at least in the Australian and the Chinese site, there is no solid black, instead being the stealth grey that has come along with the Model 3. Quicksilver is also included, or at least an option for both vehicles, but then even the red is slightly different. So it's a funny kind of 50-50 approach where Ultra Red and Midnight Cherry Red, they show up slightly different. The Ultra Red seems to be a little bit brighter compared to more maroon, or at least definitely darker in the Midnight Cherry Red. Of course, what these vehicles end up looking like to your eyes out on the road can definitely differ from what we are seeing on the screen, but it's interesting that they are not the same color. Moving on to the interior though, there has definitely been some changes. Some people might like it, some people not. It looks like they've gotten rid of the wood trim style across the front of the dash compared to just an all black, maybe leather, maybe kind of suede across the entire front. Of course, we also know that this screen is slightly larger, be it 0.4 of an inch, be it about 10 millimeters bigger. There is still a stock, and the Tesla logo, being at the Tesla T, has now just been replaced with the rest of the model lineup being it just be the Tesla. Of course, there is also changes to the center console, being it slightly different in where the chrome is less outlined, maybe a little bit more gray compared to pure silver chrome, but of course, this is the black interior. If we go to the white interior, there is now, of course, the white door panel compared to the traditional one not having any kind of color on the door. Speaking of color, we now also, of course, have the accent lighting that goes all the way around to be in line with the Model 3. And of course, like the Model 3, and as seen in the specs, we can just make out the little 8-inch screen for the rear. Speaking of the rear though, we can see that there is, at least on the Australian website and the other websites I've seen, no option to make it a 7-seat interior. This doesn't necessarily mean that it will never happen. It would just be the fact that Tesla would have the data and know that they sell predominantly 5-seat Model Ys, and so for the launch edition, they are just going to be pumping one type of car out. Another thing that I've noticed that might disappoint some people, especially considering the website on the right is still the German website, is the fact that the maximum speed has been lowered by 16 kilometers from 217 down to 201. Now, of course, this keeps the original acceleration at 5.9, and of course, if we go to maximum range all-wheel drive, the speed goes to 5 seconds and speed goes to 4.3. So there is definitely an increase there that's more in line with the performance. But we can see that the maximum speed does not change across the board unless you go to the performance, which does net you quite the hefty maximum speed increase. But just to be losing 16 kilometers, especially on places like Autobahns, it's interesting that there has been an almost 10% decrease in maximum speed. And why is that? You would think that from a manufacturing point of view, from a parts point of view, you would want the car to be at least able to sustain the old speeds from the same kind of vehicle. On a side note, something that I also found interesting about the Chinese side was the fact that you can come down here and after all of the different autopilot, you can see special charging benefits. Now, this seems to offer options for long-term charging solutions but at a discounted price, and I have not found this in any other country, especially the supercharging service package, which is kind of a middle ground between the old school Teslas, which were offered free lifetime supercharging, compared to the new ones where you have to pay or there is a membership. This is somewhere between that, where you only pay $1,200, but you can use the Tesla supercharging service at 1 yuan per kilowatt hour for 3 years or 5,000 kilowatt hours. So compared to paying whatever the standard fee would be, you are definitely going to be paying more than 1 yuan per kilowatt hour. This is something that I can see so many people in China just buying and utilizing, and even worldwide just wishing they had, especially for anyone that might live in a higher density environment where you don't have a garage exactly and Tesla chargers on your wall just to be charging and easily overnight just topping it up, compared to if somebody is living in high density living, be it a unit, an apartment, a condo, or a flat, or whatever it may be. I can see that the public reliance on that kind of network is going to be way, way higher, but definitely a good saving to have. Something that also caught my attention was the difference between the Chinese and the Australian site, which both have the new model, and of course it is through Google Translate, translating the entire page, but there is a lot of this that is bang on, exactly the same between vehicle weight and the storage space and everything else in between, but then the total length is 5 mil different, and that makes me wonder if that's a thing, is it accidental or otherwise? Also, the supercharging, if we go to the launch series rear wheel drive, being at just the rear axle, the Chinese is apparently only 170 compared to the Australian being 175. Now, these are two vehicles that are supposedly coming out of the same factory, but why is that a 5 kilowatt hour difference? Is there variations in battery chemistry being used? Is there BYD batteries, Panasonic batteries, CATL batteries being prioritized for some vehicles in some countries over others? I would love to know, is there a little bit difference there, or is it a translation error, or is it just a Tesla error? Now, of course, as much as everything that I have said here has come directly from the mouth of Tesla, straight from their international websites, and we can see in front of us right here that there are some differences between what is being displayed from the mountain ranges of China to the mountain ranges of Australia, apparently. Whatever it may be, we do not have the car in our hands yet. We aren't able to determine all those little differences, and so we will see long term how the supplier actually manages the differences. Do these differences come to fruition? Is it a translating error, or what it is? Either way, we know that this car is poised to continue to be one of, if not the highest selling vehicles in the world, and that's why people want to know.